Welcome. Listen up, sovereign of the impossible, because this isn't about you crossing a line. This is about you stepping into a place they swore didn't exist, a place carved between the seams of 5 separate dimensions they believed were sealed, sacred, untouchable. And yet you walked into all of them as if you built the doors yourself. You didn't just break the law of their world. You snapped the spine of 5 realities in a single breath and walked away without a scratch, leaving them choking on the dust of their own certainty while you rose above every map, every boundary, every invisible commandment they thought would hold you in place. You did something that by every metric, by every rule book, by every cosmic measurement, they worshipped as unbreakable, simply could not be done. And yet you did it with the calm precision of someone who wasn't guessing, wasn't gambling, wasn't even sweating, because you knew exactly what you were doing. They built their universe on 5 layers of control. The physical dimension meant to cage your limits. The social dimension meant to enforce their hierarchy. The psychological dimension meant to keep your mind obedient. The relational dimension meant to dictate who you could influence, and the existential dimension meant to lock your identity into a shape that served them. But you stepped across all 5 like they were chalk lines on the pavement, fragile things that evaporated beneath your feet. They watched you tear through the physical laws of their expectations, slip past the social thresholds they guarded like ancient temples, dismantle the psychological traps designed to make you doubt your own ascent, unravel the relational webs meant to define your orbit, and finally ignite the existential core they never believed you would touch, the dimension of self where identity stops being a cage and becomes a weapon. That's why they're panicking now, why they whisper your name with a tremor they can't hide, because they saw you collapse 5 realities in one motion, and it wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it wasn't reckless, it was intentional, elegant, terrifyingly precise, the kind of move that forces the whole world to question every assumption it ever made about what's possible. They're scrambling now, dissecting every moment like surgeons trying to revive a body that's already cold, each of them convinced they'll find the secret artery you cut, the angle you hit, the loophole you exploited. But every time they think they've mapped your path, they realize they're still missing 2 dimensions, then 3, then all 5, because you don't move in straight lines, you move in layers. That's what they can't replicate. They can understand 1 dimension, maybe 2 on a good day, but you saw the entire stack, the full architecture of their reality, and instead of navigating it, you rearranged it. That's what's burning them from the inside out. They thought you would break in 1 layer at most, maybe disturb the physical or rattle the social, but never in their deepest nightmares did they imagine someone would breach all 5 simultaneously and still look bored doing it. They don't have a word for what you did. In the physical dimension, they call it impossible. In the social dimension, they call it forbidden. In the psychological dimension, they call it destabilizing. In the relational dimension, they call it dangerous. And in the existential dimension, the place where meaning itself is stitched together, they can't call it anything at all, because naming it would require admitting they saw something their rules say should not exist. That's why their memories shake, why their voices crack when they recount the moment, why they disguise their awe behind outrage. They'll frame it as a breach, a transgression, a violation of order, but beneath the performance, beneath the polished words and steady breathing, their pride is bleeding out, because the truth they won't say aloud, the truth that stalks them in the quiet, is that you meant it. You didn't stumble into 5 dimensions, you stepped, and stepping means choice. Choice means intent. Intent means mastery. And mastery means none of their rules were ever built for someone like you. That's why they're unraveling now in slow, humiliating spirals, shock cracking through their expressions, disbelief gnawing at their confidence, confusion eroding the frameworks they once stood on, obsession blooming in the shadows as they replay your move again and again, searching for the scene where your foot first broke their illusion. They'll lose sleep trying to recreate the moment, terrified of the possibility that you could do it again. Because once someone proves a thing is possible in 5 layers at once, that thing becomes a threat they can never contain. You didn't chase power. You became power by seeing what they were blind to. You didn't seek permission. You operated in a dimension where permission doesn't exist. You didn't break rules. You rewrote the geometry of reality they cling to. That's why they fear your silence more than they would fear your rebellion. Silence means you're thinking. Silence means you're watching. Silence means you're measuring the next convergence point where the 5 layers overlap, ready for another step that will break everything they believe is anchored. They hate the feeling, the microscopic shiver that runs through them when you enter a room, the drop in their stomach when they hear your name, the static in their chest when they realize you're not bound to their dimension-specific limitations. To them, you're no longer a person, you're a fault line, a living fracture in their system, a myth with a pulse, a case study that no manual can explain, no authority can restrain, no hierarchy can place. They'll build new rules, new safeguards, new illusions of control, all designed to prevent what you already proved possible. But every new law will feel like a bandage slapped over a wound that never stops bleeding. They'll pretend the fear is gone, but their eyes will betray them, darting, scanning, searching for the slightest ripple in the air that might signal your next impossible step. Because once someone collapses 5 layers in a single act, they don't need to repeat it. The echo alone is permanent. The impact alone rewrites history. The memory alone haunts the foundations of every dimension they believed was safe. And that is what you left them with, not a broken world, but a world that now knows it can be broken. Not a single moment of rebellion, but a shift in the architecture of possibility itself. You don't have to do it again. You don't have to step across the dimensions ever once more. The fact that you already did it is enough to shape their future, alter their thinking, warp their defenses, and carve your silhouette into the walls of every reality they thought they controlled. That is your power. That is your legend. That is the aftermath of breaking 5 dimensions at once, not destruction, but a permanent fracture in their certainty, a reminder that the impossible bends when you decide it should, and that the world they built is only as stable as your willingness to let it stand. And the world they built is only as stable as your willingness to let it stand, and that realization is the splinter they can't remove. The quiet infection spreading through every decision they now attempt to make, because once you've broken 5 dimensions at once, nothing they build feels fortified anymore. It all feels temporary, flimsy, conditional, like structures made of breath rather than stone. They walk through their own domains now with the unease of people who know the walls aren't solid, who know the ceiling isn't fixed, who know that every step they take echoes differently because your presence rewrote the acoustics of their certainty. You became the variable they can't calculate, the anomaly they can't chart, the shadow that bends the angles of every thought they once considered linear. And what terrifies them most isn't that you shattered 5 layers at once, it's that you did it calmly, without strain, without chaos, without even acknowledging the scale of what you were doing, as if defying entire frameworks of existence was as natural to you as breathing. Now they study you in secret, not out of curiosity but out of survival. They replay your movements in their minds, trying to isolate the instant where physics failed, where hierarchy collapsed, where psychology inverted, where connection rewired, where identity shed its skin and emerged sharpened. They don't understand that there was no instant, it was all of them at once. A convergence, a synchronization of insight, will, discipline, and perspective that they never imagined a single human being could possess. They believed each dimension existed independently, that the physical world obeyed its laws, that the social world followed its ladders, that the psychological world held its traps, that relationships had borders, and that identity had limits. But you stepped into all of them simultaneously and made those distinctions feel like children's chalk drawings on the pavement, colorful, hopeful, but washed away at the first touch of rain. Their panic is not cinematic, it's intimate. It reveals itself in the hesitation before they speak your name, the tightening of their eyes when your presence shifts a room, the tremor in their confidence when they remember that the last time they dared to underestimate you, 5 realities folded under your steps. They're not afraid of what you did, they're afraid of what it means, because if someone can break 5 layers at once, then every law they trust, every belief they cling to, every rule they enforce becomes negotiable, and not by committee, not by consensus, but by the will of one person who saw the full stack of existence and realized none of it was unbreakable. That's why they've become obsessed with interpretation. They create theories, narratives, whispered explanations behind the scenes, trying to categorize you into something smaller, something manageable, something they can pretend to understand. Some call you an anomaly, others call you a rupture, some call you the 5th axis aberration, while others simply refuse to categorize you at all, terrified that giving you a label might summon you like an echo from the walls. But every theory collapses under the same flaw. They can only think in single layers. They analyze your physical movement without considering your social leverage. They analyze your social leverage without considering your psychological clarity. They analyze your psychological clarity without considering your relational imprint. They analyze your relational imprint without considering your existential awareness, and because they separate what you fused, they'll never understand what truly makes you untouchable. You didn't break 5 dimensions, you recognized they were one. And that understanding alone unravels their attempts to rebuild order. They patch the physical rules first, rewrite guidelines, strengthen borders, redesign checkpoints, but the breach wasn't physical. They repair the social codes, next tightening hierarchies, sharpening divisions, but the collapse wasn't social. They create psychological barriers, rewrite protocols for thought, influence, and expectation, but the fracture wasn't mental. They try to isolate you relationally, distance themselves, classify proximity as risk, but the damage wasn't relational. Then, finally, in desperation, they attempt to redefine identity itself, crafting new categories, new doctrines, new boxes they hope will contain the type of being you've become, but you can't confine someone who slipped out of identity the moment it stopped serving them. And every time they adjust one layer, it destabilizes another. Because the dimensions that they treat as separate fields are, in your worldview, one ecosystem, one structure, one fabric. Their rules were written to bind individuals who couldn't see the seams. But you've seen the seams so clearly that even their patchwork looks transparent now, flimsy attempts to hold together a reality already split at the root. They call it reinforcement. You see it as repainting cracks in glass. Meanwhile, their behavior reveals the truth they refuse to admit. The recalibration of their world is not about safety, it's about fear. They fear the silence between your words, the calm between your breaths, the possibility that your next step might once again collapse all 5 layers in unison. Because the first time you did it, it was an event. The second time would be a message, and the third time would be a rule. That's why they move differently now. Slower, more cautious, more self-conscious. They second-guess every assumption, every belief, every commandment, because every time they think in one dimension, a memory reminds them that you operate in 5. They think horizontally. You think vertically, they react. You foresee, they measure. You perceive, they enforce. You rewrite. And the gap between those modes of existence widens every day, turning you into something they can't chase, can't match, and can't predict. Behind closed doors, they speak in hushed tones about the 5-fold fracture, the day their reality bent under the weight of someone who refused to be limited by the language of limitations. And though they don't dare say it in public, in private their conclusion is unanimous. If it happened once, it can happen again. And that thought alone deforms their confidence, shrinks their authority, hollows out their certainty like a structure eaten from the inside. They've begun assigning watchers to you, not to monitor you, but to interpret you, to predict you, to decode the patterns of a mind that no longer fits within the mental architecture they built. But those watchers crumble under the same pressure. Watching you is like staring at a horizon that moves. Every time they think they've caught the shape of your next step, you shift into a layer they didn't consider, a layer their language doesn't even account for. You exist beyond their grammar. And the worst part, the part they hide even from themselves, is the envy. They resent your freedom, your fluidity, your ability to move through 5 layers without losing yourself. They want what you have, the panoramic awareness, the multidimensional instinct, the clarity that comes from seeing the whole board at once instead of moving piece by piece. But they can't admit that envy, because envy implies admiration, and admiration implies submission, and submission implies you were right all along. So instead, they pretend. Pretend the breach was temporary. Pretend the impossibility was a technical glitch. Pretend that your move can be dismissed, explained, normalized. But even their pretending has cracks, because while their words try to bury the event, their eyes betray the truth. They know they watched someone do the impossible across all 5 layers. And no amount of denial changes the fact that once the impossible becomes real, reality itself becomes negotiable. You've altered them, not through confrontation, not through force, but through existence. Now, every time they walk through the physical world, they remember that its boundaries once bent under your feet. Every time they navigate their social systems, they sense the fragility of the ladders they climb. Every time they examine their own thoughts, they hear the echo of a mind that shattered its own cage. Every time they approach connections and relationships, they measure themselves differently, aware that influence is not something granted, it's something embodied. And every time they look in the mirror, they see the ghost of your existential redefinition reflecting in their own expression. They're living in a world you cracked open, a world that doesn't close again. And the most haunting truth is this: you don't need to move, you don't need to act, you don't need to breach anything ever again. The first fracture is enough. Its echo will guide them, haunt them, shape them, limit them. You've become not an event, not a threat, not a rebel, but a principle, a living amendment to the boundaries of reality itself. They will never again be able to speak of limits without thinking of you, and that is the quiet crown you now wear, the invisible symbol they can sense even when they pretend not to see it. Because once someone becomes the benchmark of the impossible, every person who doubted them is forced to measure themselves against that standard forever. You've turned into the reference point they can't erase, the anomaly their minds loop back to when they try to rebuild confidence, the unspoken proof that the world they trusted is no longer as rigid as they believed. And while they cling to routine, to structure, to the way things should work, the truth pulses beneath every surface. You changed the architecture of possibility simply by refusing to obey the blueprint. They're haunted not because you defied a rule, but because you revealed the rule was never real in the first place. And now, everywhere they turn, they feel your impact lingering like a shift in atmospheric pressure. The physical dimension no longer feels solid. Every wall carries the memory of the day you walked through reality like it was permeable. The social dimension feels fragile. Every hierarchy trembles under the knowledge that ranks crumble when someone stops believing in the ladder. The psychological dimension feels unstable. Every thought they have now competes with the echo of your clarity. The relational dimension feels volatile. Every connection they form is measured against the gravitational pull you left behind. And the existential dimension, the deepest layer of all, feels permanently altered. Identity itself now comes with the question, what if they see themselves the way you saw yourself? You didn't just break 5 dimensions. You broke their certainty, and certainty, once shattered, never regrows in the same shape. They'll spend years pretending they've recovered, that the breach has been sealed, that the world has returned to normal, but it won't matter, because normal isn't something you return to after witnessing someone step through 5 dimensions like smoke. Normal becomes nostalgia, something they talk about, long for, mimic, but never actually reclaim. Your existence split the timeline. Before you, rules were absolute. After you, rules became optional. And that shift, that irreversible perspective change, is what they fear most. But here's the truth they'll never admit, not even in their most private thoughts. Deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the envy, beneath the resentment, they respect you. Not publicly, not loudly, not in a way the world will ever hear, but in the quiet corners of their minds. They carry the image of the moment you stepped across 5 forbidden layers with a calm that made chaos look coordinated. They know that you didn't rise by accident. You rose by understanding, by perception, by courage, by the refusal to live inside walls carved by smaller minds. And that is why they'll watch you for the rest of their lives, not to stop you, but to learn what reality does next when someone who can operate in 5 dimensions decides to move again. They won't say it aloud, but you've become the compass they secretly follow, the presence they measure themselves against, the myth they study in silence. You don't need to act again to maintain this power. The first act created a legacy. And legacy doesn't fade. It echoes. It multiplies. It defines. You stepped into 5 dimensions once, and that single step rewrote the horizon. And now, whether you choose to rise higher, remain still, or disappear into the folds of possibility, the truth is written. Reality is bigger for you and smaller for them. And they will never, not in this lifetime or any other, forget the moment they saw someone do what they swore could never be done. Welcome, homie. Listen closely, because what happened around you wasn't random, and it damn sure wasn't subtle. You walked into a space with an energy so raw, so unfiltered, so amplified that the entire atmosphere had to adjust itself. You didn't say anything threatening. You didn't move aggressively. You didn't cause chaos. You simply showed up as your real self, and that alone was enough to make people take a step back, not out of danger, but out of shock. There's a rare kind of intensity that some people carry, the kind built from experience, truth, and a level of self-awareness that most people never reach. It's not about being loud. It's not about being dominant. It's about having an energy that exposes the room. Your presence doesn't overpower others. It just makes people confront themselves, and most aren't ready for that. What you felt wasn't fear directed at you. It was people realizing all at once that your energy is different. Different in a way they can't measure. Different in a way they can't control. Different in a way that makes them look at themselves and think, wait, why does he feel so far ahead? That's what made them step back. Not because you changed suddenly, but because you finally stopped dimming your voltage. For a long time, you carried your energy quietly. You walked into rooms trying not to disturb the balance, trying not to draw attention, trying not to make others uncomfortable. You didn't shrink out of insecurity, you shrank because you thought people deserved peace. But the truth is, your presence was never the disturbance. Their lack of self-confidence was. Your clarity made their confusion obvious. Your purpose made their excuses visible. Your growth made their stagnation uncomfortable. And yesterday, last night, that moment, you didn't shrink. You didn't water yourself down. You didn't dilute who you are. You walked in at full power without apologizing for it. And when someone shows up with that much internal alignment, that much grounded confidence, that much centered awareness, people don't know how to react. They step back. They get quiet. They observe. And some even panic internally. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're undeniable. People can handle arrogance. They can handle fake confidence. They can handle loud personalities that mask insecurity. But what they can't handle is someone who is calm, certain, and carrying a level of authenticity that cuts through the noise. That's what your energy did. You didn't blow up the vibe, you revealed it. You exposed the difference between people who talk about growth and someone who actually lives it. You exposed the difference between a crowd that moves with trends and a soul that moves with intention. You exposed the difference between people who pretend to have direction and someone who actually does. When you walked in, the vibe didn't just shift, it snapped. The air didn't just tighten, it recalibrated. The room didn't just fall silent, it synced to your frequency without realizing it. This is what happens when someone finally steps into who they really are. This is what happens when potential stops sleeping. This is what happens when a person stops pretending and shows up fully. You've hit a stage of inner evolution where your presence speaks louder than your words. You've developed a quiet intensity, the kind that comes from surviving things you never talked about, healing from wounds people never saw, growing through phases no one knew existed. Every lesson you learned became part of your energy. Every hardship you endured became part of your frequency. Every clarity you found became part of your vibration. So now when you walk into the world, people don't just see you, they feel you. And not everyone is ready for that. Not everyone is prepared for someone with a mind sharpened by reflection and a soul strengthened by endurance. Not everyone is used to someone who carries themselves with intention instead of impulse. Not everyone knows how to behave when someone who knows their worth enters the room. That's why they stepped back. That's why the vibe broke. That's why everything shifted the moment you arrived. People don't get intimidated by other people. People get intimidated by what other people represent. You represent certainty. You represent direction. You represent strength that doesn't scream, it whispers. You represent a version of themselves they're still trying to understand. That's why your energy feels heavy to them, not heavy like a threat, but heavy like truth. Truth has weight. Truth has frequency. Truth has impact. And when someone walks in carrying truth, not the kind they brag about, but the kind they've earned, the room feels it. Your energy blew up the vibe because the vibe was too small for you. You didn't match the room. The room had to adjust to you. Understand something. You can't hide your evolution anymore. You can't shrink to make others feel comfortable. You can't tone down your frequency for people who haven't done the work you did. You're not intimidating, they're unprepared, you're not too much, they're not enough for the version of you that exists now. You didn't walk in trying to be anything. You simply arrived as yourself, and that was enough to disrupt every mask in the room. Because people can sense when someone is rooted. People can sense when someone knows themselves. People can sense when someone carries a purpose deeper than conversation. You've reached a point where your silence speaks for you. Your posture speaks for you. Your presence speaks for you. Your spirit doesn't walk into rooms quietly anymore. It walks in with the weight of everything you've survived, everything you've learned, and everything you're becoming. And trust me, whether they ever admit it or not, people feel safer around someone like you, someone solid, someone grounded, someone awake, someone who doesn't play pretend, someone who doesn't drain the room but clarifies it. They weren't backing off because you scared them. They were backing off because your energy demanded honesty. The masks slipped, the facades cracked. The noise fell silent. Your energy didn't break the vibe. It revealed the truth of everyone in it. And now the question is simple. Are you going to shrink again to make them comfortable? Or are you going to keep walking at this level even if it means the world adjusts around you instead of the other way around? Because something big is happening in you and everyone can feel it. Even if they don't understand it. Even if they don't know how to react. Even if they step back with wide eyes trying to figure out what changed. You didn't change, you unlocked. And once your energy reaches this level, you don't go back. People keep saying they don't know what shifted inside you, but truthfully, it wasn't one moment. It was hundreds of moments layered on top of each other, the disappointments you didn't complain about, the betrayals you didn't retaliate against, the nights you kept going even when nothing made sense. All of it built a pressure inside you that didn't break you. It refined you. And now the refinement is showing, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way your energy moves before you even speak. What people felt around you wasn't aggression, it was alignment. When someone becomes aligned, truly aligned, their entire aura hardens into something unshakable. They stop leaking energy. They stop chasing validation. They stop bending themselves to fit into places they've outgrown. They walk different, breathe different, speak different. Not because they're trying to impress anyone, but because everything unnecessary has finally fallen off. Your aura isn't loud, it's clear, and clarity is intimidating to anyone still living in confusion. People sense that you weren't waiting for permission anymore. You weren't trying to fit a mold or satisfy expectations. You were just being exactly who you are, without shrinking or explaining. That level of presence hits people differently. Some get inspired, some get curious, some get uncomfortable, and some, the ones who haven't dealt with themselves, step back because the reflection you create is too sharp. Your energy didn't blow up the vibe by force. It simply entered the room carrying truth, and truth always clashes with illusion. Think about the average environment. People walking around trying to seem confident, trying to seem put together, trying to seem calm, everyone trying to look like they know who they are. But you didn't walk in trying anything. You walked in embodying what you've learned, embodying what you've survived, embodying what you've become. And embodiment is uncomfortable for those who rely on performance. They backed off because you carried a presence that didn't need validation, attention, or approval. When someone is unaffected by the room becomes affected by them. That's the dynamic people felt. You weren't reacting to their energy was reacting to yours. Some people stepped back because they weren't ready to match your frequency. Some stepped back because they weren't ready to face themselves. Some stepped back because your presence exposed how much pretending they were doing. Most people only know how to interact with someone who blends in, but you didn't blend in. You stood out without trying. And when someone stands out naturally, others begin questioning themselves internally. Why don't I feel that grounded? Why does he seem so sure of himself? Why do I suddenly feel insecure? What does he know that I don't? These questions don't create fear of you, they create fear of what you represent. And here's the truth. You represent inner work. You represent discipline. You represent evolution. You represent someone who's not ruled by ego, but by awareness. You represent someone who walked through things that would have destroyed others and came out clearer, sharper, stronger. People can handle someone stronger than them physically. What they struggle with is someone stronger than them mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Your energy carries a story, and everyone can feel it without knowing the details. They felt the nights you pushed through. They felt the battles you fought alone. They felt the resilience you developed in silence. They felt the shift in your confidence, the real kind, not the staged kind. People didn't step back because you were dangerous. They stepped back because your presence reminded them of the work they haven't done yet. That's the effect of someone who's awakened to their identity. They don't brag, they don't force, they don't demand. They simply walk in truth, and truth rearranges the room. You know why it shook people so hard? Because they saw something in you that they weren't expecting: self-possession. Most people are fragments, pieces of who they want to be, pieces of who others told them to be, pieces of old stories, old fears, old beliefs. But you're becoming whole. And wholeness is rare, wholeness is powerful. Wholeness is loud even when you're silent. That's why the vibe cracked. You weren't mirroring the room, you were anchoring it. And people who rely on external validation didn't know how to stand steady in front of someone who doesn't need any. Let's break down exactly what they sensed. 1. Your confidence wasn't loud, it was controlled. This scares people more than loud confidence. Loud confidence can be faked. Quiet confidence is earned. 2. Your awareness was sharp. People felt like you saw through them without even trying. When someone senses you, understand more than you reveal, it makes them step back instinctively. 3. You weren't competing. You weren't trying to dominate the room. You weren't trying to impress anyone. This makes people who rely on comparison feel lost. 4. Your energy wasn't reactive. Nothing around you pulled you off center. People who expect reactions get confused when someone responds with presence instead of emotion. 5. Your growth was undeniable. The version of you they thought they could predict is gone, and unpredictability when it's calm and intentional is intimidating. People stepped back because they saw something they couldn't explain. Something like, how did he change so fast? Where did this confidence come from? Why does he feel different, stronger, calmer? What did he discover that we didn't? Here's the real truth they'll never say out loud. They weren't backing away from you. They were backing away from the realization that they ignored your potential for too long. People treat you differently when they realize the person they underestimated is the most self-aware one in the room. Your energy blew up the vibe because the vibe was built on surface-level connection, and you walked in with depth. Surface and depth don't mix. Surface cracks under pressure. That's what happened. They felt the shift before they understood it. They backed off before they processed it. They reacted before they could explain it. And the funniest part? They'll talk about this moment later. They'll say, he felt different that day. They'll ask, did you feel that vibe too? They'll replay it in their mind because your presence activated something in them they didn't know existed. People never forget the moment they encounter someone operating at a higher frequency than they're prepared for. Your energy didn't create fear, it created recognition. Recognition of your growth, recognition of their stagnation, recognition of the difference between someone who knows themselves and someone who doesn't. What you're experiencing isn't rejection, it's acknowledgement. A silent acknowledgement that you've stepped into a version of yourself they never expected you to reach. They're not backing up because you're intimidating. They're backing up because you're awakening something deep within yourself, and deep always shakes shallow. And this isn't the end of your transformation. This is the beginning of others noticing it. There comes a moment in every transformation where the world finally notices what you've known deep inside for a long time, that you are not the same person they once casually dismissed. And you've hit that moment, not because you forced it, not because you demanded attention, but because your internal shift became too strong to ignore. Your energy is speaking for you now, louder than anything you could ever say out loud. What people felt when they backed off wasn't fear of you. It was fear of what standing next to you made them realize about themselves. They saw the difference between who they pretend to be and who you've quietly become. They felt the weight of their own unresolved insecurities pressing against the calmness you carried. They realized the growth they avoided is the very ground you now stand confidently on. That's what happens when someone reaches a level of authenticity that others haven't even begun to understand. The air changes before the words do. You didn't shift the room with attitude, you shifted it with presence. Presence built from reflection, discipline, honesty, self-respect. Presence shaped by every night you worked on yourself while everyone else distracted themselves. Presence formed through storms that didn't break you, but carved you. Your energy didn't blow up the vibe, it exposed it. It showed who was pretending. It showed who was insecure. It showed who was intimidated by their own lack of direction. It showed who was uncomfortable with genuine strength. You didn't need to perform. You didn't need to exaggerate. Your energy walked in before you did, announcing not power, but alignment. And alignment shakes people more than dominance ever will. Because here's the truth. People expect loud confidence. They know how to categorize it, dismiss it, or argue with it. But they don't know what to do with someone who's calm, grounded, and unbothered. That scares them more. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're rare. In a world where everyone rushes to look strong, you quietly are strong. In a world where everyone tries to impress others, you simply move with purpose. In a world where most people hide behind masks, you walk in with transparency. And transparency is something very few people can handle, because transparency forces truth, and truth forces reflection, and reflection forces change, and people don't like change unless they're the ones choosing it. So what do they do when someone walks in carrying that much self-awareness? They back off, they get quiet, they look down, they pretend not to notice. They adjust their posture, their tone, their expression all unconsciously, not because they're scared of you, but because they're scared of what your presence reveals about them. This is the invisible shift of power no one warns you about. This is what happens when you stop living below your potential. This is what happens when you stop diluting who you are for the comfort of others. This is what happens when you take ownership of your life. People feel it, the room feels it, the air feels it. Even people who don't know you feel it. Your growth is radiating. Your confidence is stabilizing. Your identity is solidifying. And when someone reaches that level, the world adjusts around them, not the other way around. You've crossed into a phase where your energy does the talking, and energy doesn't lie. Energy doesn't pretend. Energy doesn't apologize. Your presence has evolved into something people remember long after you leave. They replay the moment. They re-examine their reactions. They question why they felt what they felt. And eventually, they begin to realize the truth. He's leveled up. He's different. He's focused. He's awake. Your energy isn't chaotic, it's controlled. Your power isn't loud, it's real. Your presence isn't aggressive, it's unmistakable. And the people who backed away, they weren't rejecting you. They were responding to the version of you that no longer fits inside their old perception. This is your new reality. Your presence will unsettle some. It will inspire others. It will silence many. It will attract only the ones aligned with your growth. Because energy doesn't lie, and yours has become the kind that demands honesty, respect, and authenticity by default. So don't shrink, don't apologize, don't question the shift. You earned this presence. You built this frequency. You rose into this reality. And if people are stepping back now, it's only because you stepped forward into who you were always meant to be. Well, well, well. To my untouchable predators of the mind, the ones who never bowed to ordinary, who never lowered their standards to mediocre, the time has come. That invisible wall they kept building between you and the world, it just shattered, and what's left behind is something they never expected to see: your genius. Yes, the harsh, undeniable truth hit them like a punch in the gut. You are a freaking genius. Not the decorative kind they parade in galleries or the textbook kind that gathers dust on shelves, but the kind that rewires entire systems quietly, surgically, without the need for noise or approval. And now, as the dust from their collapsing assumptions settles, you stand in the clearing sharp, unbothered, undeniable. They're stunned, speechless, paralyzed by a realization they tried so hard to avoid. You were thinking several dimensions above them the whole time. Not because you wanted to prove anything, not because you chased recognition, but because that's simply the altitude at which your mind operates. You didn't rise to their level, you revealed that they were never anywhere near yours. Look at them now, those fictional skeptics and polished pretenders who once thought they had you mapped out. They made the mistake of underestimating you. They reduced you to the boundaries of their own thinking, as if someone with your mind could ever be contained within the shallow lines they drew. They thought they understood you. They thought they could predict you. They thought your brilliance needed their validation to exist, and then your silence proved louder than any speech they could imagine. Because that's the beauty of you. You didn't shout, you didn't argue, you didn't try to prove them wrong. You let them talk, let them guess, let them build those flimsy fortresses of doubt, and then your intellect walked straight through them like a whispered storm. Your genius. The kind that sees connections others overlook, the kind that anticipates reactions before they're even formed, the kind that works in stillness while others drown in noise. That genius is what unraveled their confidence. They're not stunned because you got loud. They're stunned because you stayed precise, because you stayed strategic, because you stayed ahead without their applause, without their permission, without their guidance. They can't comprehend your clarity. They can't decode your intuition. They can't grasp how your mind slices through complexity like a blade made of pure understanding. To them, intelligence is a performance. To you, it's breath. It's instinct. It's the natural state of your existence. And now here's the irony they can't escape. The very people who tried to contain you are the ones now scrambling to understand how they missed you. They're replaying old conversations, revisiting every moment they dismissed you, trying to convince themselves they didn't overlook the obvious. But the truth stings too sharply to ignore. You didn't change. You simply revealed what was always there. Your genius didn't appear out of nowhere. It emerged because the moment required it. And when destiny calls, brilliance answers quietly. Watch them now, these fictional elites with their manicured facades and perfectly arranged expressions. On the outside, they wear calm like a costume. But beneath that thin layer of performance, Their minds are spiraling. They're questioning their own intuition, their own judgment, their own confidence. They're wondering how someone they never took seriously just rearranged the entire mental landscape around them. They thought they were the gatekeepers of intellect, the guardians of innovation, but you walked in and rewrote the blueprint before they even realized you were holding the pen. There's a special kind of silence that happens when someone confronts a mind greater than anything they prepared for. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of cognitive collapse. Their certainty shatters, their assumptions twist, their worldview tilts just enough to make them dizzy. That's the silence you created. That silence is your kingdom now. And the best part? You didn't have to force a single thing, because true genius doesn't push, it pulls. It draws the world toward it, bending the atmosphere with nothing but presence. Your presence, calm, calculated, impossibly composed, is the very force they underestimated, the very force that now has them clenching their jawlines behind their smiles. They can't admit any of this, of course. Their pride won't allow it, so they stay quiet, too stunned to speak, pretending they haven't just witnessed their entire mental hierarchy crumble. They'll claim they're thinking. They'll claim they're analyzing. They'll claim they're processing. But you and I both know the truth. They're recovering from the shock of realizing they never stood a chance against you. And what exactly about you shook them so deeply? It wasn't drama. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't confrontation. It was the way your mind moves, silent but unstoppable, soft but devastating, subtle but seismic. It was the way you predicted outcomes without needing the full picture. It was the way you calculated without appearing to calculate. It was the way you stayed unfazed by the noise, the doubts, the sneers, the petty attempts to underestimate you. While they were busy broadcasting their illusions of superiority, you were studying patterns. While they were competing for attention, you were dissecting possibilities. While they were trying to look intelligent, you were becoming untouchable. This is the kind of brilliance that doesn't just shine, it blinds. And the moment your brilliance became undeniable, their world shifted. Not violently, not chaotically, just quietly enough to make them question everything. Because brilliance like yours doesn't need applause to be real. It forces recognition by simply existing. You see, they thought genius was loud. They thought it was dramatic. They thought it was wrapped in accolades and applause. But you proved that real genius is subtle, strategic, and silent. Real genius sits in the shadows, gathering storms, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Real genius is not a performance, it's a presence. And now the presence is yours. But let's be honest, this moment was inevitable, because someone like you was never meant to blend in. You were always meant to disrupt the pattern, to challenge the narrative, to stretch beyond the limits others cling to. While they memorized rules, you questioned them. While they followed paths, you created new ones. While they clung to certainty, you explored possibility. You've always been the mind that rewrites expectations. And now, as you stand in the glow of their stunned silence, it becomes obvious why your rise struck them so deeply. Their doubt wasn't about you, it was about themselves. They couldn't accept your genius because it exposed their limitations. They couldn't see your brilliance because it highlighted their blindness. They couldn't acknowledge your depth because it threatened the shallow comfort of their illusions. Your existence shakes them not because you're dangerous, but because you're undeniable. And denial can only hold for so long before it collapses. Now the air around you feels different, thicker, heavier, charged with something they'd rather not name. That feeling they're trying to ignore, that is respect disguised as fear, awe disguised as silence, recognition disguised as composure. They can hide it from themselves, but they can't hide it from you. because you know the truth. Their silence is not emptiness, it is surrender. Surrender to the fact that your intellect stands above theirs. Surrender to the fact that your brilliance changed the entire dynamic. Surrender to the fact that you are the variable they cannot solve. And here's the twist they never saw coming. You don't need to humiliate them. Their own realizations are doing that for you. Their own confusion is the mirror they're forced to stare into. Their own inability to speak is the confession they'll never say out loud. You've dethroned doubt itself. You've shattered expectations without lifting a finger. And now, the world around you rearranges itself, quietly acknowledging that you are not someone to be questioned, you are someone to be studied. Not someone to be underestimated, you are someone to be understood. Not someone who fits inside their categories, you are someone who breaks them. This is your genius unfolding in real time. And as you stand here in the aftermath of their silence, one truth becomes impossible to deny. Your genius is no longer hidden. Your genius is no longer doubted. Your genius is no longer ignorable. Your genius is now the center of the story, and the world, whether it speaks or stays silent, must adjust itself around you. And now that the truth of your genius has settled into the air, thick, undeniable, impossible to ignore the real, shift begins, because silence is never just silence, not the silence you caused, not the silence that followed the collapse of their assumptions. This is the kind of silence that echoes, it reverberates. It spreads through their minds like a quiet tremor that shakes the walls they thought were unbreakable. You've entered a new phase now, a phase where the people who once doubted you no longer look at you with arrogance, but with calculation. You can see it in their posture, in the way their eyes hold just a bit longer, in the way their confidence falters by a fraction of a second. They're trying to regain balance, trying to pretend your rise didn't destabilize their worldview, but every small hesitation betrays them. They're analyzing you, studying you, trying to decode the pattern behind your brilliance, but all they find is more confusion, because you weren't operating on their pattern to begin with. Your genius is not a method they can learn. It's not a technique they can imitate. It's not a playbook they can steal. It's a frequency, a wavelength, a layer of thought that most people will never reach, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack the discipline to go beyond their own comfort. Your discipline is your advantage. Your quiet mastery is your shield. Your clarity is your leverage. And now they know it. They're beginning to realize that every time they thought you were behind, you were actually observing. Every moment they assumed you were confused, you were calculating. Every situation where they believed they had the upper hand, you had already seen the ending. That realization alone is enough to make their certainty fracture. Their silence wasn't admiration, it was shock. Their shock wasn't respect, it was disbelief. Their disbelief wasn't anger, it was fear, symbolic, psychological, unspoken. Fear of what it means for someone like you to exist, because someone like you changes things. Not loudly, not violently, not recklessly, but fundamentally. You shift the atmosphere in ways they can't measure. You reset the standards without announcing it. You raise the bar simply by being in the room. And those who once felt secure in their own intellect now feel exposed under the sharpness of your presence. They don't admit this, of course. They won't. Their pride is a cage too tight to let honesty slip through. But you see it anyway. You see it in their eyes, the way they flicker between admiration and dread. You see it in their words, the way they choose them too carefully now. You see it in their behavior, the way they adjust themselves in real time, trying to keep up with the rhythm you set. Because that's the shift they can't control anymore. You set the war. Rhythm now. They used to think they were the ones conducting the room. They believed their opinions shaped the energy around them. They assumed their voices carried the most weight. But now, everything has reversed. They're no longer the conductors. They're the ones waiting for your cue. They don't speak unless they've interpreted your silence. They don't act until they've analyzed your stillness. You've become the gravitational pull around which their entire decision-making process slowly orbits. Not because you tried, but because your mind demands it. Your intelligence isn't just sharp, it's stable, it's grounded. It's so anchored in self-awareness that you don't need to justify yourself. You don't need to defend your brilliance. You don't need to announce your growth. You simply grow and the world recalibrates around you. That's what unsettles them most. They can handle loud competitors. They can handle arrogant pretenders. They can handle flashy performers. Those are easy, predictable. Loudness makes noise, and noise is easy to track. But someone like you, quiet, strategic, hyper-aware, you move in ways they cannot anticipate. You think in dimensions they've never practiced. Your silence is not emptiness, it's calculation. Your restraint is not hesitation, it's precision. And now they're beginning to understand that their previous roadmap for dealing with people no longer applies. You don't respond the way they expect. You don't panic where they thought you'd crack. You don't seek attention where they assumed you wanted validation. Instead, you remain composed, unshaken, watching them from a vantage point they never imagined you'd reach. And the realization hits them hard. They can't control you. They can't manipulate you. They can't psychoanalyze you. They can't predict you. You are the variable in their equations that breaks every formula they relied on. This is why they're panicking, beneath the surface, not dramatically, not outwardly, but internally, in the subtle ways that reveal the truth, the slight tightening of the jaw, the shift in tone when they speak to you, the sudden caution in their opinions, the hesitation in their once confident assumptions. These are the symptoms of losing psychological control. But here's where the story grows even more interesting. Their silence, shaken as it was, won't last forever. People who fear brilliance eventually try to fight it, not with force, but with noise. Noise is their only weapon, their words, their attempts to explain you, their attempts to minimize you, their attempts to reframe the narrative so it feels less threatening to their ego. They'll speak again. Oh, they will. But their words will carry a new weight, a new hesitancy, a new insecurity, a new acknowledgement of your rise, and their attempts to challenge you, they'll fall flat. Because they're trying to fight brilliance with noise. They're trying to compete with your mind using volume. They're trying to react to your strategy with guesswork. It's not a fair battle. It never was. It never will be. You're not even playing the same game. They're trying to catch up to your thoughts while you're already building the next 10. They're trying to understand your decisions while you're already executing future outcomes. They're trying to imitate your methods while you've already evolved past them. This is why they can't replicate you, because your genius isn't a template, it's a trajectory, and your trajectory cannot be copied. But their attempts to mimic you will be fascinating to watch. They'll try to speak with your clarity, but their words will stumble. They'll try to move with your precision, but their steps will misalign. They'll try to replicate your calmness, but their anxiety will bleed through the cracks. You've set a standard they cannot reach, and that standard is suffocating them. But while they spiral in uncertainty, you move forward with intention. You don't rush, you don't panic, you don't chase, because true genius doesn't chase, it attracts, it magnetizes. It shifts the energy of a room with nothing but presence, and your presence is now the loudest thing they hear. Every time you enter a space, their thoughts rearrange themselves. Every time you speak, the atmosphere changes shape. Every time you remain silent, the silence becomes a mirror, revealing their insecurities. You're not just influencing the environment, you're redefining it. Quietly, elegantly, powerfully. This is the phase where your genius becomes something larger than intelligence. It becomes identity. People start adjusting themselves to you. People start measuring themselves against you. People start watching their words around you. People start carrying themselves differently in your presence, not because you demand it, but because your brilliance makes mediocrity impossible. You're forcing them to level up simply by existing, and that, not the silence, not the shock, not the disbelief, is what truly scares them. Because once someone like you appears, the world can never go back to its old defaults. You expose the gaps, you highlight the illusions, you reveal the shallow thinking. You make the landscape look different, feel different, operate differently. Their old comfort collapses, their old certainty dissolves, their old confidence evaporates, all because your presence reframed the scale. And now, as they prepare to speak again, as they try to regain a foothold, as they attempt to rewrite the story to protect their fragile egos, one thing has already become irreversible. You are no longer the underestimated one. You are no longer the overlooked one. You are no longer the maybe, possibly, someday genius. You are the center, the standard, the reference point, the mind they cannot outrun. And no matter what they say next, no matter how loudly they talk, no matter how desperately they try to reassert themselves, your brilliance has already carved its place into their reality. They can break their silence. They can scramble for explanations. They can drown themselves in noise. But the truth remains untouched. You rose beyond their expectations. You shattered their illusions. You redefined the hierarchy without ever raising your voice. And now, they speak with caution because you think with clarity. You're not just ahead, you're unreachable. But here's the truth they'll never admit, not even to themselves, in the quietest corners of their thoughts. Once someone like you emerges, the entire landscape tilts. They can talk all they want now. They can string together sentences soaked in envy or coated in false confidence, but every word they speak exists under the shadow of what you already proved. Their voices are just echoes. Your brilliance is the source, and that's why their noise doesn't faze you anymore. You've grown past the need to counter them, to correct them, to justify your choices. You've outgrown their expectations so thoroughly that their opinions no longer even register as obstacles, their background static, mild disturbances, ripples against the hull of a ship that's already left the harbor. Because when your genius becomes undeniable, when it becomes a presence that reshapes every room you enter, those who once underestimated you can only react from behind. They're stuck responding to the past while you're already engineering the future. They're studying the imprint while you're making the next step. They're obsessing over the moment they were stunned while you're crafting the next moment that will silence them all over again. That's the difference now. You don't rise to meet their chatter. They fall quiet in the presence of your clarity. And they feel it, this shift, this imbalance, this new gravity you've brought into existence. They can pretend nothing changed, but their actions expose them. Their caution exposes them. Their sudden respect, their sudden restraint, their sudden curiosity, it all exposes them because they know something they can't say out loud. You've become the mind they measure themselves against, and that terrifies them. But you move forward without flinching. Because genius, true genius, is not a moment, it's not a spark, it's not accidental, it's a relentless state of being. And you've stepped into it fully, unapologetically, unshakably. They may break their silence, they may try to rewrite the narrative, they may try to reclaim the illusion of control. But they can't rewrite what already happened. They can't undo what you already exposed. They can't silence a brilliance that never needed permission to exist. So let them talk. Their words are temporary. Your impact is permanent, because in the end, the stunned silence you caused was not an accident. It was a revelation, a shift, a moment that split the old world from the new, and that new world, it has your genius carved into the center of it forever.